As we carry the diesel cans towards the blast doors and towards the generator room, we were so happy. I was actually smiling. For the first time in a while, I was like, thankfully, we are going to be able to do something that we might be able to get the computers running. We might get the showers running. Oh, that's going to be wonderful. But as we walked down the hallway and as we got to the stairs, one of our guys said, wait, hold on a second. He took the diesel can that he was holding, put it down and unscrewed the top, stuck his nose in and sniffed it. Now he has a very strong sense of smell, and I all of a sudden realized what he was doing. He looked at us and he just started cursing up a storm. I looked at him and I put down my diesel can, opened up mine, took a whiff, and realized something was off. Something was very off. We looked over and one of our guys grabbed a small piece of cloth, dipped it in the fuel, and put it on the ground. He then had a small lighter in his pocket and tried to light the fuel on fire. Normally, diesel fuel only takes a few seconds and it will light. However, this did not. He sat there for over a minute, holding the flame of the lighter in one place, even holding up the cloth so that the heat of the flame was at its maximum. And then, eventually, seeing the cloth charred, he tossed it to the ground, stomped on it, and again started cursing. A bunch of us were looking at each other like, oh no, you've got to be kidding me. And then a few of the younger folks started asking why, what happened? We told them the diesel had gone bad. It can do that? One of the youngest guys yelled out. Yeah, diesel fuel without any type of stabilizer is only good for about a year, maybe 2. Stretched out at most to about 5. Lord knows how long we've been asleep. It's not even worth carrying anymore. We turned around and trudged back up to the stairs and went past everybody. They all looked at us strange. Why were we bringing the diesel cans back up? And we simply told them it wouldn't matter. We would have to bleed the lines afterwards anyway. It was worthless. We brought the diesel outside. We didn't dump it. We just left the cans. And we went back inside. Now what the hell are we going to do? Well, we decided to continue on as best we could. We set up a little more of a perimeter and began to blockade more of the walls, just to make sure nothing decided to jump in while we were asleep. We remembered that there were still some nasty creatures out there, and none of us wanted to be on the receiving end of whatever in the hell was out there, especially since we didn't even know anymore. Some of the young kids were having a lot of trouble sleeping because of that, and we tried to comfort them as best as we could, but nothing is more comforting than making sure that your walls are secured. Over the course of the next few weeks, we began to send out hunting parties to find anything extra to supplement the food. Having what we did have was great. However, there was a major issue. It was going to run out. We need to be able to sustain ourselves somehow. I was able to find a little bit of potatoes, and we left them out in the sun to hopefully see if any eyes would pop up. If so, at least we would have some sort of sustenance later on. However, it seemed as though we were middle of the summer, and I know from my past experience that if you don't put potatoes in the spring, you don't get potatoes in the fall. It's just that simple. As we were hunting, we could hear off in the distance several shots. I knew one of the other hunting parties was far off to the northeast, and that's where the shots were coming from. So my group turned, and we headed their way. We didn't have any comms or anything like that, so we had to slowly make our way walking through the forest. Thankfully, the deciduous forest we were in was not that difficult to traverse. However, it did still take us over an hour to get there. When we did, we could hear something screaming. We began to run faster and faster, worrying that it was our own guys, but as we got close, I could see that red hand waving at me as Bill was waving me over. When we got to him, we asked him what happened. They told us that they came across some sort of mutated pig. The thing was huge, had to be twice the size of an SUV. The tusks themselves went a good 6 feet high, and it also had 6 limbs, and it was longer than your normal pig, and they had just tangled with it. Unfortunately for the pig, it didn't realize that it couldn't bust through trees. I mean, this wasn't no freaking cartoon. However, it did end up taking a few extra shots to the face. The problem is, pig skulls are notoriously dense, as in exceptionally dense. This meant that all they had ended up doing was pissing it off. However, one of the other guys had actually managed to get a few shots in the neck, and I realized that the thing had squealed and run off. Looking over, we could still see a very wide and very noticeable blood trail. I looked over to one of our associates who had a very good sense of smell. "Can you track him?" He turned his head up and all he heard was, oh yeah, I got their scent now." "Okay, lead the way." I made sure that everyone was spread out just in case. We didn't need to end up in the wrong end of an ambush if we were all walking ducks in a row. But I knew that anything bleeding this much, no matter how big it was going to be passed out by the time we got to it, or completely bled out. We got all the way to what looked like a den, and we looked inside. It took a little bit of time before we were able to maneuver ourselves enough so we could actually see down into this hole. This massive hole, big enough would seem we could almost drive a semi-truck into. I knew pigs made dens in the earth, at least some of them do. And we looked closer, and sure enough, there it was. We couldn't tell if it was sleeping or it was dead. We didn't want to damage any more of it because all of it was going to be precious to us. So we moved in closer and closer. I motioned everybody back, and I got in position. This dinky 223 might be good enough for shooting varmints, but shooting this thing, you're just going to piss it off. But the only thing I could really hit was its face. Cycling the selector lever, I fired one round in between its eyes. It didn't even flinch. I smiled as I got up, and I looked at everyone and goes, "Hey, you guys got it. It's done. Now we just got to get it out of here." Which eventually took the entire day just to pull the pig carcass out of the den. As we looked inside, some of us felt bad as we saw that, well, it had mated somehow. There were other pigs in there. However, they were at least half the size, clearly not piglets, and they decided to come at us as the large pig came out. However, just as normal pigs would do, or in case of warthogs, they bolted off to the side instead of facing us down. This made a sigh of relief. We had to stay by the carcass over that night as 2 men ran back, and I say men questionably, ran back to get some sort of carts, anything we could carry to get this pig back. We knew we'd have to take it back in pieces, so the rest of us started a fire and moved around and started taking it into pieces. Our butchery skills were not that great, however, any idiot can quarter, or in this case, 1/6 a pig. It's not that difficult to do. Even one of these legs was enough to keep our entire group fed for 3 days, easily. And we were grateful for this. And it did not occur to me until I heard another one say, "Wait a minute. The fat! We can render the fucking fat!" I looked as, "Render the fat? What do you need? Are you trying to make lard or..." Oh, son of a... I couldn't even believe that I had forgotten about that. Heating up pig fat without actually boiling it can be usable. The oil that comes out will work inside a diesel tank. So eventually, though it took 4 days to do so, we got the pig back to our compound. We did not lose any part of it except a little bit of the guts. Of course, the bladder had to remain as none of us knew what to do with it. And some of the intestines. No reason to make sausage so big that, it wouldn't even fit inside a coffee cup. Besides, most of us didn't even know how to make sausage for that matter. However, what we could salvage, we did. Any of the organ meat that was taken, we took the tusks, but that was more for... we're looking to craft things out of them. Any of the bones that we could take, there wasn't much left. And at this time, survival is key, which means being wasteful can be fatal. Once we had a few days to actually chew on this massive porker, we were able to set up a type of still. We had to rip out a tub out of one of the areas, and we used that to heat up the pig fat. We had to do it slow. It's a very long process. However, it did work. And eventually we ended up with gallons and gallons and gallons. We took the bad diesel and we took it way off to the side, threw it away. We didn't worry too much about contaminating anything, as what are we going to do with it? We can't burn it. You can't drink it. You can't do anything. We just spread it out so it would dilute enough and it wouldn't damage the local ecosystem. We did end up filling all of our fuel cans, and we still had more pig fat. So I decided to render it into lard. We're going to need that, as we will eventually run out. Everyone looked and realized how big of a deal this was, how big of a win it was that we had found this animal. However, in the back of our minds, there was always that one question. Was this thing human before? Was it human? Was it born of a human? Did it come out of one of the pods? Is it an amalgamation or is it a mutation? We don't know, but it's best to keep that sort of thing out of your mind. Eventually, we took all the cans down to the diesel generators. There was 4 different generators, all of which industrial size, and it took us a moment to figure out how to actually operate it. Thankfully, one of the women there had been working as an engineer, and she came down and helped us, filling up one of the tanks, as we only wanted to get one going for right now. We began to reach over and fill everything up as she flipped her switches, bled the lines, and then hit the start button. And it was the most beautiful sound in the world as that huge generator turned over and the lights began to flicker. A bunch of us ran upstairs and told everybody to shut the lights off on the top floors. Anything above ground had to stay off. It doesn't matter if it was a clock radio, a computer, it didn't matter. Everything had to turn off. And we did. We ran up and shut everything off, with the exception of one computer. Our local techie is going to be sitting there going through everything, trying to figure out exactly what else had happened. What the hell was the reason we were like this? I remember looking at my hands, my blue hands, looking down to my body and realizing that I don't really look human. I look almost like one of those things from those god-awful sci-fi shows. Just thank God I didn't have an antennae. If that was the case, I would have probably ripped them off. I hate that shit. As the generator continued to run, we filled up the other diesel generators and got them running for one specific reason. We wanted to make sure we had enough power to run all the hot water heaters. We waited and realized that thankfully the hot water heaters were electric, but it would take a while before they were warm. We let the kids and the women hose off first, of course, and then it was our turn, and I've never felt such a grand sensation as that warm water going down my face, my chest, and my back. You have to enjoy the little things that you get when it comes to survival. If you don't enjoy the little things, you will find the bad things tearing you down slowly. Once we had finished the showers, I went out to find out that someone had gone downstairs and actually looked, and the console next to the blast door was on. We decided to save as much of our homemade diesel as possible and shut down all but one of the generators. This allowed the blast door console to stay operated. All of us were downstairs as we stood in front of this massive hunk of metal, and our wonderful key card holder was all smiles as he pulled out the first key card and looked at us. I knew he was thinking, "Don't you love me?" As he put the first one down, access denied. And he tossed it to the side. The next one, access denied. Pulling out a third, access denied. And this continued for 2 or 3 more cards before access granted. Then we heard the locking mechanism start to move out of place. Parts of the moving slowly, other words coming out with a very quick ka-chunk, and then the door began to slowly open. As it did, the few of us that still had weapons had them up and ready, as we didn't know what was going to come out of the doors. We told everybody to stay behind us as we kept our weapons up. Safety's off, finger on the trigger as the door opened to nothing. The door opened to a massive hallway, a huge tunnel. We moved forward and looked to see if there was anything around that we could use as we went down the tunnel. I made sure those few of us that had some sort of military training were up front, as we could clear any intersections that may come or any rooms. But there weren't any. We went down as the tunnel slowly descended a little more, then leveled off, then came up, then seemed to turn slightly to the left, and then it straightened again. Wow, how long was this thing? This was a huge tunnel. And then we saw something out there. We saw a dark area at the end of the tunnel, and I motioned for everybody to stay calm. I turned around a little bit and motioned for those of us to fall and to stay back and stay put. Those of us with weapons began to move forward into the darkness. As we got up to the darkness, I pulled out my flashlight, and so did a few others. I heard one guy say, "Grab your torch." And as soon as I flipped mine on, so did others. We looked, and it was another massive room. We spread out, weapons up in one hand, flashlights up in the other, as we looked around. What we found was more tunnels. 6 more tunnels. All of them spread around, not evenly. 4 on one side, 2 on another. As we went to each of the tunnel openings, we moved our flashlights up towards them. Then with a sudden burst, light flew into the room to the point where my eyes injured themselves. I had to cover my eyes as they couldn't adjust fast enough. I turned and looked, and one of our guys had found the breaker box. The lights were on now, and as I turned back to the tunnel, I could see the lights coming on one after another down the hallway. But nothing was there. It was just tunnels. No side doors, no side rooms, just tunnels. We looked over at those who were not carrying weapons and motioned them forward so they could see. Everyone had questions that nobody could answer, of course, since we were all experiencing the same thing. We told them that it would be a while before we were able to explore each one. Each one of these tunnels had to lead somewhere, and we had a good idea where. After searching the main room, we told the main body to go back. We covered them as they went, just in case something decided to come up behind us, with 2 of our men in front. We got back to our original opening and told them that we would have to search the tunnels one by one, which we did. After getting a good night's sleep, first thing in the morning, we grabbed what materials we needed and we went down the tunnels. We started from left to right. The first one all the way down to another blast door. Unfortunately, this one didn't open. We couldn't get the console to operate. It just would not turn on, and we couldn't figure out why. About 3 sets of lights prior to the door were just off. We went back and went to the second one. Again, we went down, but this time we found a side room, some sort of control area. It was barely a security checkpoint, big enough for about 3 people to stand in, with a few readouts, most of which didn't make sense to any of us. However, we still looked to see if there was any cameras or anything we could use, any type of materials, any firearms, ammo especially, but nothing. We continued down the tunnel and we found another blast door. This one, the lights went all the way to the end and the console was there. I motioned our man forward with the keys, and the very first one, boop, access granted. And we saw the mechanism slowly working and then bolts knock out of place. We held up our weapons and looked as the door slowly opened. And in front of us was something I was not expecting to see. Well, maybe a little. It was a busted up room. We entered it and we looked over and we saw the same messed up staircase. I was like, there's no way. This can't be the same. This can't be right. A few of us moved over to the staircase and climbed it, and sure enough, we were in the same building, the same compound that the monster, the big troll monster, had torn apart. I thought maybe they must all be interconnected. I asked if that's what everybody else thought, and they agreed. We went back to the blast door. There was nothing here, and we knew it, and we sealed it, just in case something else decided to come in behind us. We didn't want any openings. Going back down, it was time for the third one. Making our way down, we got to the end, and it was completely lit up. Again, keycard, bloop, access granted. And we watched the mechanism. This time, we didn't know what to expect, so we backed up a little bit. Just a little bit more. And a little bit more as the door began to open and then got stuck. It seemed to have something in the way. Using a small mirror, we looked around the corner, and sure enough, some sort of debris was in the way. We couldn't see what it was, but something was there. Maybe part of the building fell down. We didn't know. But we couldn't get the door mechanism to go any further. Pushing as hard as we could start moving it slightly, and very slowly. As the mechanism began to whine, we actually had to shut the door and then reopen it again. This time, as it began to open, we all got behind it and began to push. And we began to push the obstruction out of the way as the door opened enough for us to get through. And once it did, we hurried through to see what was on the other side. What we found on the other side was enough to make us all shake in fear. What had actually stopped the door was not just a simple obstruction, but something that had been adhered to the floor, adhered to the wall, adhered to the door, adhered to everything. We had just walked into a building that was covered in webs. Not completely covered, as we were able to get through the door itself, but as we looked around and moved our flashlights back and forth, you could see a whole bunch of different webbing around. The obstruction that we thought that was attached to the wall turned out to be something. I don't even know what it was, as it was still encased mostly in a web, yet you could see 2 large puncture wounds in the center of it. Thinking back to my times in anthropology, I realized that this might be a bad idea to be here, and others agreed. We began to back away from the door as we could hear something moving. Something who seemed to be quiet, seemed to be trying to be quiet, yet now that we have enhanced hearing, something too large to be as quiet as it wanted to be, as it was moving faster and faster as it wanted to get closer and closer. We realized as we got to the door that the motor was still whining as it was trying to open the door. We got through as we could hear the sound of something moving. It wasn't just one. Everything had suddenly gone into a fever pitch. Just as we hit the button to close the door, the engine turned off the whine and started to go the other way, and something shot through, and Bill suddenly went backwards screaming, what the fuck? And we looked over. Something had grabbed onto him, some sort of rope. We reached up and grabbed him and pulled as the door began to slow down. We looked over and we couldn't believe what we were seeing. This half arachnid, half woman thing was standing there. Its legs on both sides, once on the wall, once on the door as the door was closing. Web had come out of its abdomen and it grabbed Bill on the back like fucking Spider-Man, and it was pulling him. It was using its other legs to pull him. We looked at its eyes and it looked hungry. It was rubbing its hands together, its human's hands together, and licking its lips as though it had just found a tasty meal. Somebody had dropped a steak in front of a starving man. That's what it looked like as it pulled. We grabbed a hold of him. and we pulled like hell. We were barely able to keep him from going backwards, and she began to pull even harder. Other spiders reached over and grabbed a hold, using their legs to also pull on this webbing. They couldn't quite get an angle to shoot more through, yet they pulled on the one strand that was there. Holy God, was that tight. One of the other guys grabbed the knife and tried to cut the webbing, but it just bounced off. We couldn't realize what the heck was going on. And we pulled and pulled and pulled as we were all being drawn towards the door. And we looked, and that thing screamed at us in curses and also in an inhuman scream as the door began to shut enough that they couldn't reach through. We knew we just had to hold him for a few more seconds, just long enough to keep him from being pulled through. And then when the mighty slam, the door ended up in place again, and the mechanism began to hold. We looked at Bill. His red face had gone completely pale. As he looked over, that thing had not only grabbed him by the back, but had actually grabbed his tail. His tail was barely 6 inches from the door. Had it ended up in the door, he would have lost it. We looked over and tried to find a way to get him loose. We tried the knife again. That didn't work. We didn't want to shoot anything in an enclosed area. And then Bill had an idea. Just burn the damn thing. We looked over, and I didn't have a lighter. I looked to our compatriot who did. He pulled it out, and as soon as he lit it and the flame touched the web snapped clean in half. It seemed to smolder as it moved up towards Bill and also back towards the door. We looked around to each other. What the hell was that? We realized we had entered a spider's nest. We realized there were things out there extremely dangerous, more dangerous than we had even thought. I'm sure even the trolls would have had trouble with these things. So we looked any way we could, and finally we found some sort of marking, anything we could. The only thing we had to mark it, though, was blood. I volunteered to be part of the giant X we had to draw. I sliced open the back of my hand and started smearing the one long side as Bill retreated over to the side, still shaking from the experience. Another of our number decided to slice his hand and start smearing down the side. A giant X ended up on the door. We then spelled on the bottom, "Do not open." And then on the side of the wall, someone else decided to get a little inventive, and they actually wrote "Spider's Nest" with a big arrow pointing at the door. Wrapping up our injuries, we headed back down the hallway. That would be it for the day. We had to tend our wounds now, and Bill was in no shape to continue anyway. I looked back and realized we should have just shot him, but everyone was freaking out too much trying to keep Bill from being taken. When we got back, we explained what had happened. Unfortunately, the children had overheard our conversation and were shaking uncontrollably for the rest of the night. I have to admit, I had to hold on to a few of the women who started shaking as well. There was no funny business there, as everyone was simply too scared. That was one of the few nights we kept the generator running all night, but we kept the doors down to the basement levels locked and barricaded. We were not going to let anything in. The next 2 days, we searched the other halls. We ended up in the basement level of our pod room, if you want to call it that, at one of them, and the other one led to a second building that was full of pods. These ones had already been opened. We had to hazard a guess that this was the ones from the sanctuary area. When we went to the next one, we realized that that one had trouble with its power. The lights were flickering on and off, and yet we still had enough power at the door that the console was operating. Reaching over for the key cards, our buddy hit it and got a access denied. Surprised, he reached for another key card and again got a denied. Like, okay, what's going on here? Finally, we're access granted. and the door began to open. This time, not taking any chances, we took a few steps way back and made sure our safeties were off with our weapons up. The door clanked and then slowly began to open. We watched as it slowly began to move. And we didn't move a single muscle. Not until the door was all the way open and it stopped with that huge thud. Moving slowly, we pulled up our flashlights and we moved around. We looked left and right. And as we did, we were blinded by lights. The lights had actually turned on. This shouldn't be possible unless somebody's running the generator. We looked around and we couldn't figure out who had turned the generator on. Was this a backup battery or something? Is it a motion detector? We looked around and realized that this was just another smaller room. We realized we would have to go up a floor to find out what was going on. 2 of our numbers stayed by the door just in case, and the rest of us went upstairs. Moving up the stairs, I kept clearing each corner methodically, making sure nothing came around. We turned the corner and realized something. The generators. We couldn't hear the generators. It was a backup battery. We didn't have a backup battery. What was so important about this one? Why was this so important that they would need a backup battery system? We cleared the bottom basement level with all the generators, all the plumbing and everything. It looked like it had not been touched recently, but more recently than 10 years. It wouldn't be until we got up to the next floor that we truly received the shock that we were not truly expecting. How was this even possible? So far, we've been human enough to face the horrors of this world, human enough to stay together, human enough to make allies, and human enough to search the unknown. Are we human enough to handle this?